everybody. Welcome back to my workshop and welcome back to my garage. This is going to be episode 10 of my Elysium Rebel single cut build. And what we're going to be covering in today's video is just going over the finishing process on what I've got done so far. I'm still in the middle of it. I haven't got everything completed yet, but I wanted to kind of give you a rundown on where we're at with the guitar. First off, what I did is I did several samples, 4 different samples on how I wanted to carry out the finishing process. We'll talk a little bit more about that later on in the video. Also, what we're going to cover is going over the final sanding, doing the grain fill operations, doing sanding sealer operations, and applying the initial layers of the top coat of the yellow. So I'm on hold right now for some more paint. I'm waiting for it to come in before I can finish doing the yellow coat on the guitar. Basically, I had it pretty much all painted, but I noticed some flaws in it, so I sanded back several areas of it, and I only had enough paint really to do the guitar one time. I didn't have anything extra. So right now I'm just kind of on hold waiting for that paint to come in. Let's get rolling on the video and see where we're at so far. As I mentioned, I am doing a TV yellow finish on this, nitro finish. So what I've done is I've done 4 test pieces. With the 4 test pieces, what I did is I've kind of varied the process on how I was going to go about doing it. So sample 1, I did sanding sealer, I hit it with some white, a coat of vintage white, then I grain filled, and I used a tinted grain fill on this bottom portion and normal grain fill on top, or neutral. And then I sanded that back, and then I hit it with yellow. Came out okay. Didn't really like the way the white looks underneath it, so I'm not going to use sample number 1 at all. Sample number 2 was sanding sealer, a coat of yellow, and then grain fill. And I used the neutral grain fill on top. I used a tinted grain fill on the bottom, and then I hit it with yellow again. This one you can start to see the grain on the tinted grain pattern, which I really like, and I'm going to use that technique of using the tinted grain filler when I go to fill the guitar. But the process that I'm actually going to use is on sample number 3. And this one I did sanding sealer, then I did a grain fill, and then I hit it with yellow. And this one I actually like the best. That was a neutral grain fill underneath it, but you can start to see the grain come out a little bit. So if I use the tinted grain fill, it's going to pop even more, and that's what I'm looking for. And then sample 4, what I did is I grain filled first with neutral grain fill and then painted over top. Again, a nice finish, but it doesn't really make that grain pop. So that, like I said, I'm going to use sample number 3, which was sanding sealer, then grain fill, then yellow. And the reason why I'm going to do it that way is because it made it so much easier to level that grain fill off and to get the excess off with it already having the sanding sealer on. Plus it uses less grain fill that way because the sanding sealer goes into the pores. Once it dries and shrinks back, it seals it to where the grain filler won't seep further and further into the wood. It's just going to fill the pores and move forward. So that's what I'm going to use as sample number 3. All right, we're getting ready to spray sanding sealer on the body now. I've got it all wiped down. So what I did is I masked off the fretboard. I used high pressure air across the whole guitar to make sure there's as much as possible blown out of the pores. Basically, you take that and you want to blow any of the loose dust or anything off the guitar. And then I took and tack clothed it with tack cloth. And I did that process twice. Blow out all the pores, tack cloth it, blow out all the pores, tack cloth it. And then I went through and wiped it down with naphtha. So from this point on, I'm only going to handle the guitar wearing gloves for a little bit until I get the sanding sealer put on, a couple coats here, and I'm going to let it dry for 24 hours, sand it back level, and then probably take a look at it then to determine if I need to put another coat of sanding sealer on, sand it back level, or if I can go ahead and do the grain fill at that point. So let's go ahead and get ready to hit this thing with some sanding sealer. And as you can see, I'm just doing a really light coat from about 8 to 10 inches away with the can. And I'm using a nitro cellulose lacquer sanding sealer. All right, so that's the first coat of sanding sealer on it. We're gonna go ahead and let that dry for 24 hours, or dry for about an hour, hit it with the second coat, and then we'll give it a good 24 to 48 hours to dry up and let that shrink back into the pores. So what I've done is I've got the body sanded back down. This had 3 coats of sealer on it, sanded it all down nice and smooth, and then The sealer I use basically just to seal the pores of the wood, not to fill the pores. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go through the grain fill operation on this. What I'm using is an oil-based grain filler from Oxford, and that's the paint system that I'm using as well. The sealer was Oxford sealer, and the paint and the nitro clear is going to be the Oxford as well. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to start doing the grain filler. The way it says to do it is apply it, rub it across the grain, not with the grain, but across the grain, and that pushes it down in the grain, and then let it sit for about 15 minutes as that oil evaporates out and leaves the filler in the pores, and then I'll buff that, kind of buff it off, and again going across the grain rather than with the grain. And that's going to fill those pores, and hopefully what will happen is I'll just have to do one grain fill. I did add a little bit of tint to the grain filler just to darken it up a little bit because it was a neutral color, so I wanted the grain to pop just a little bit more. So I did add a little bit of red dye to it, red mahogany dye, so we'll see how that turns out. So let's get going. I'm going to use burlap to apply it, and burlap also to rub against it and rub it back out. So just dipping that in and work this across the grain. And everything I've read about it, they say to use burlap. It's the best to use because it's got a little bit coarser structure and it holds the grain, it holds the filler a little bit better. As I'm putting that in. So what I've done, as you can see, I've got that in there. What I'm going to do now is just let this set. And here in a little bit I'll buff that back. And seeing as how I'm right here, I'm going to go ahead and do the peg head as well. It's the first time I've used oil grain filler, so we're going to see how this goes. In the past, what I've always used is a water-based filler from StuMac. And like I said, I did my samples when I was getting ready to do the guitar. I did the samples, I did 4 different samples, and the one that I liked the best was where you did the sealer coat first and then the grain fill. That was the one I liked the best. So that's why I'm doing it this way. So I'm going to go ahead and continue off camera, and then I'll bring you back in a little while. Alright, so off camera I went ahead and finished the front of the guitar, and then I put the grain filler on the back. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and wipe it off and wipe it across the grain. Then what I'll do is I'm going to let this sit overnight, a good 24 hours. I'll sand that surface again, see how the grain is, and if I have to do another fill on it, I will. But the way it's going on right now, I don't think I'm going to need to, because I don't think it's going to shrink that much with me putting the sanding sealer on it first. I've got a fresh piece of burlap, and I'm just going across. And you can see, look how it brightens up that wood. You can see that it just takes that grayness off of there. And I can feel as I'm coming around with the burlap on this, it's very, I mean, it's silky smooth. Not like it was before when the grain was open. Even though it was sanded at 320, it was still, you could still feel the grain. But right now this thing is, it's feeling like glass. So I'm thinking as long as this grain filler doesn't shrink a whole bunch, I'm not going to have to worry. And you can see it's pulling it up onto the burlap. And the reason why it's good to use the burlap is because the burlap's got those open pores. So it goes into there rather than just smeared it around the surface. The body here is flashing off very well. So by the time I finish with this, then that'll be good. A little tricky around the cover because there's not a lot of space there. And what I did is I spent a lot of time when I was putting this in with a nice swirl pattern to just press it into that grain. But you can see how that really shines up. And you can tell that the grain is filled on that. I mean, because it's just gliding across the wood right in these areas now. This is such a pretty pattern right there in that area. I really love the way that wood swirls. And you can see, I mean, it's got a nice, almost like a glossy finish on it at the moment. And all I've done is grain fill it. So there you have it. Grain filling, the first round of grain filling is done anyway, and I hope that's going to be enough. But if it's not, I'll hit it with another coat. It only took about an hour to do all that grain fill, so I'm not too concerned about that. I'm looking for a nice, smooth, high gloss finish on this, so I don't want to cut any corners. I want to take my time and get it right. So what we're getting ready to do right now is do the final level sand on this for the sanding sealer. So far, what this has had is it's had 3 coats of sanding sealer put on it. That was sanded back. And then I applied 2 coats of oil-based grain filler. That was sanded smooth, and then I applied another good heavy coat of sanding sealer, kind of to lock that grain filler in. And you can see it's got a really nice sheen to it. It's a pretty nice finish actually as it is. I'm quite happy with the way the wood looks. You can see the grain pattern on the neck quite a bit where the grain filler's in there. So that came out nice. The heel area is really nice in that area there. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and level sand this with 600 grit sandpaper. Get it nice and smooth. I'm going to wipe it off, tack cloth it, and then wipe it down with some naphtha, and it'll be ready to start hitting with the first coats of yellow. So what I'm going to be using for sandpaper to sand this is with the Super Aslix 600. It's a really nice paper. It's a dry paper. It doesn't clog up. And you can see I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. This is basically going to just kind of sand this sealer smooth. And you can see how quickly it does that. Nice smooth finish on that. Because all I want to do is make sure this is nice and smooth and ready to accept paint. And with all the sanding, with the prep work I've done on this, this is going to be pretty good. So it is ready for paint. I've got just some tape stuck in the tuner holes and in the bridge holes. I've taped up the pickup cavities because I don't want to get a bunch of paint in there because it's a pretty snug fit with the P90s going in as it is. So I want to keep that, and then that'll get some shielding paint when the time comes. I've taped up the control access cover in the back, and it's been wiped down with naphtha. I'll wipe it down again where my hands are touching, but I'm going to go ahead and get this hung up and get ready to get the first coat of paint on it. So let's go ahead and get some paint on this thing. I've got it in my garage. I don't have my paint booth built yet, so I'm just painting in here. Got all the doors shut to where I don't have a bunch of breeze going through and pulling dust through. So I'm going to be using a respirator as I do this. There we go. Let's get to painting. All right, so there we are with the first bit of color on. A little blotchy, but that'll come out with the second coat. So that looks pretty good. So now I'd have to wait an hour. It says leave about an hour between coats. So I'm gonna leave an hour, and then I'll come back and I'll hit it again with the second coat, and I will probably do a third coat, and then that'll be about it. I want some of the wood grain showing through, but you know, I only want a little bit of it showing through. I don't want a ton of it. I really want that nice yellow, bright yellow guitar, which that's going to be. So far I'm really pleased with the way it's turning out. All right, I think that's going to wrap this video up. So as you can see, we've got quite a bit done on the guitar. Still got a ways to go yet. I still need to get a couple more coats of yellow on it just to make everything uniform. And then I've also got to get the headstock spray painted black, where I'm going to do the face of the headstock in black, and then I'll start hitting it with clear coat. If you like what I'm doing and want to keep up with what's going on, please click like, click subscribe, leave a comment below. I really appreciate your feedback. I do read every comment, and I try to answer every comment as well. So please feel free to leave some feedback below. But until next time, take care.